What is up, everybody? Happy Halloween and welcome to the 4th annual 31 on 31, this year being Unholy Terrors. For those of you that might just be finding this video or might just be joining us here recently and don't know what 31 on 31 is, it started 4 years ago with us ranking the big 3 slashers, Michael Myers, Jason, and Freddy, and we have kept the tradition alive where every single Halloween, and even a few times in between then, on the 31st of the month, we take 31 franchise films and bring them together under a theme and rank them against each other. So this year we've got paranormal, haunting, demon possessions, and we're going for the franchises of Poltergeist, Blair Witch, The Omen, The Exorcist, The Conjuring, Insidious. So all of those movies and those franchises thrown together into a pot, stirred up, and brought to you worst to best. Now, I'm not doing this video alone. If the schedule that I put out was followed and we didn't have any technical difficulties behind the scenes, I should be the last video that you're watching today. But Brian Lomax Movie Talk, Sean Chandler Talks About, and CP from Willis Screedia are all doing this video as well. All of their links is going to be in the video description below, especially if you're watching this in the future. So after you're done watching this one, be sure to check out their videos and see how their 31 on 31 differs from mine, because I'm sure there's going to be quite a bit of difference amongst these franchises with all 4 of us. Now, with that being said, the thing that shouldn't have to be said, but always has to be said, these are just our subjective opinions. These are our personal preferences. This is how we look at these 31 films, either for nostalgia or through first-time viewings. What we get out of them is unique to us. So if you don't agree with our list, you're not supposed to agree with this list. Put your list down below. Don't be an asshole in the comment section trying to correct us on how we're right and how we're wrong. We're all right and we're all wrong. It's subjective opinion on art. So with that being said, guys, let's kick it off with 31. The worst of this entire pile of movies, the most garbage film that I was forced to watch over the past couple of months, is Exorcist II: The Heretic. Now, this is a movie that I already knew everybody hated and I already expected it to be bad, but most times when I walk into a first-time watch that everybody warns me about, more times than not, I walk out saying, it wasn't quite as bad as you guys made it out to be. Not the case this time. I have seen worse movies, I have seen worse sequels, I have certainly seen worse horror movie sequels, but this is by far the worst idea for a horror sequel that I have ever seen. There is some things that they do here as far as a follow-up to the story of the original film that it just makes my head hurt thinking of how you could concept this to be a good follow-up to that movie, and who the hell greenlit this enough for it to be shot, edited, and released to the public. It's baffling to me. I'm sure there might be some people out there that appreciate the huge pendulum shift that you get in this movie to where it's going more for the positivity and the way that Regan came out of it, and now she's this beacon of light and she's got psychic fucking powers now and we're gonna save the grasshoppers, yay! I'll never watch this movie again. It was pretty miserable to get through, and if you are a fan of the Exorcist franchise but just haven't gotten around to this one, don't get around to it. But one thing we can take away from this movie, if you are ever in the middle of a demonic possession situation in your house, just do this shit. It wards off evil. Coming in at number 30 is another first-time watch for me, and it's Book of Shadows: Blair Witch 2. Now, you will find out I'm not really a big fan of the Blair Witch movies, so you're gonna see a lot of them lower on this list. But this one absolutely deserves to be this low because it's just an incoherent mess. Apparently, there is a lot of studio meddling in this movie, and there might even be enough footage out there to scramble together some kind of a Snyder cut, if you will, and maybe that version of this movie will be interesting or will be coherent or will be an interesting follow-up to the original film, but the version that we have just feels like a studio that had no idea how to capitalize off of the smash success that the Blair Witch Project was and just threw some shit together. I mean, the story here is incoherent. The way that it's edited, it makes it to where there's no tension, there's nothing to look forward to in the story, because they tell you who survives at the beginning and it's all kind of told through flashbacks, and then by the end you're kind of shown that the movie or the characters in the movie are unreliable narrators, and you're left with a headache by the end of it. You're like, what the fuck was that supposed to mean? So are they dead? Are they not dead? Are they killers? Was it all a setup? Is it the witch? What is going on here? I have no idea. I have no fucks to give about ever finding out. Until there's a director's cut, this movie will stay down here at number 30. Number 29 is going to be Omen IV: The Awakening. Now, this is a movie that, again, first time watch, and a movie that I was warned beforehand by Brian Lomax how horrendous it was. And it came this close to being so bad that it's good, because it is absolutely laughable, the execution front to back, start to finish of this movie. They basically just ignore all the events of the first three films and the second coming of Christ and everything that happened in Omen 3, and just said, you know what, let's just do this again, but we'll switch it over to a girl because that's going to be unique, right?
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
So you get this girl that's brought in, and she's evil as fuck, she's crazy, she's definitely got some nefarious things going on, and all throughout the movie they just kind of repeat beat by beat the things that we saw in the first film regarding, you know, this kid being really creepy and people trying to get to the parents and say, hey, this bitch is crazy, you need to do something about it, and every single person that tries to do that dies in some crazy accident. But the accident kills in this movie are fucking hilarious. There's literally one where a guy drives out of a driveway and decapitates himself on the platform of a moving truck while he's driving like 3 miles per hour. So it's just absolutely hilarious slapstick comedy at that point. The music in this movie is baffling. It literally feels like somebody took something off of like the big comfy couch and threw it into this and said that's good enough for a soundtrack. It doesn't fit whatsoever. And then by the end, when you get these revelations about she's just the protector and she's not the actual Antichrist, and the main character actually gave birth to the Antichrist, and what? Number 28, beating it out by a hair, is Omen III: The Final Conflict. This movie to me was just a disastrous conclusion to the original trilogy of films. I was looking forward to watching it because I love Sam Neill, and I was like, hey, if he's playing Damien, that's definitely going to be one of the best parts of the movie, right? No, he's not very good here at all. There's so many monologues that he has to give that just, they fall flat. The overall story here just doesn't really feel like an Omen movie, because as much as you don't necessarily want to see another movie about Damien in his youth doing the same things and people being killed, because we kind of saw that twice now, him being an adult kind of takes away the entire appeal of this franchise. Now it's no longer this creepy demonic kid, now it's this creepy demonic politician, and they don't even really go full on with the horror side and the supernatural side of the storyline. So people die around him, but it just feels like a political thriller to a certain extent. And the way that they decide to defeat Damien is fucking unforgivable. I mean, you get into this whole thing with the second coming of Christ and they start killing babies, which really turned my stomach. It's just a me thing, I get that. But you get into the final act, and all throughout this franchise we've been told that this guy has to be stabbed with every single one of these collection of knives, and every single person that has even gotten within walking distance of him with this knife has died instantly in a horrible accidental way. But just random chick moseys her way on up to Damien in the third act, stabs him with one knife, and he's down for the count. There is the end of your horror icon for the past 3 movies. What?
My weakness, it's small knives.
Number 27 is a movie that I actually have seen before. I've seen a couple of times before, but I had no memory of it whatsoever, and that's Poltergeist III. This movie used to play on like HBO or Showtime or something back when I was a kid, so I remember certain scenes of this movie. I remember the aesthetic of this high-rise hotel. I remember like it being frozen and frost-covered as a visual aesthetic. Beyond that, didn't remember shit. Just watched it a couple weeks ago. Don't really remember shit now. I mean, this is a movie that is just definitely at the tired stage of a franchise to where they have no more ideas. Unfortunately, there's a really ickiness to this movie too, because the main girl that played Carol Ann in these 3 movies died during production in a pretty horrific way for a parent to see their child die. So every time I watch this movie, every time I think about this movie, even as a kid, I knew that, and it always just added this weird, uncomfortable vibe to the film. But it doesn't have anything new to say. It's just, let's take Poltergeist stuff and have it in this high rise. We'll bring Kane back, even though it's not the same actor. So the guy that was actually really creepy and effective in Poltergeist II, no, this is just generic old guy. And you're like, motherfucker, you again?
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
And the surrounding cast here is just odd. It's just such a 90s, almost direct-to-video, direct-to-TV cast, to where it just feels like nobody really cares and nobody's really there to give it their all, and it just, I don't know. I mean, you replace the great Judd T. Nelson in the first two films, and you take the patriarch role and you give it to Tom Skerritt. Thanks for showing up, Tom, but you didn't add anything to this movie, sorry.
Thanks so much for coming.
My daughter better be alive, you sick son of a bitch.
At the end of the day, as a conclusion to the Poltergeist franchise, it adds absolutely nothing to the story, and I'll have no desire to ever watch this movie again. Number 26, probably gonna piss a couple of people off, but I'm just being dead honest when I tell you that I have always hated the Blair Witch Project. I understand that this is a horror classic for some of you. Some of you saw it in theaters back whenever the marketing campaign had everybody convinced that this was real, actual found footage that they spliced into a film, and holy shit, there's really a Blair Witch out there. I watched this movie years later when it was obvious that this was a movie, when there was no marketing campaign, there was no virality, and this was after the found footage genre, if you can call it that, had been burnt into the ground and just fucking ruined horror for a certain era there for me, because I do not like found footage. There's maybe two in existence that I like, and that's the Chronicle movie and that's The Last Exorcism. Everything else doesn't do anything for me. I just do not like that style of filmmaking. This was the one that started it all as far as the big craze of the 2000s. It wasn't the first movie to do it, but it catapulted it into this huge, profitable thing that a lot of horror filmmakers were doing. And I certainly appreciate the viral marketing that this thing had before viral marketing was even really a thing. It definitely shows how smart the people were that were making and released this movie for a period of time, and maybe it still is, was like the most profitable movie of all time. But you strip all that away, and this movie has nothing for me. There's no story here that I'm intrigued with. There's no visuals that I'm intrigued with. I don't like any of the characters. To me, when I think of the Blair Witch, I think about three random people walking around in the woods for an hour and 10 minutes, whatever it is, yelling and screaming and cussing at each other, and then we see a dude stand in the corner at the end, and that's it. I get nothing out of it. This is the one horror classic that I can honestly say I hate. I get a headache every time I try to watch this movie. It just isn't for me. If you're a fan of this, sorry, it's not for me. Number 25 is going to be Dominion, a prequel to The Exorcist. Now, there's an interesting story with this movie as well as another film that you'll see just slightly higher than this one, and the fact that the studio made two films that are exactly the same with the same lead actor. Dominion, a prequel to The Exorcist, was meant to be a prequel to The Exorcist, and the studio saw the final version of this film and said, fuck this, we're not releasing it. They scrapped the entire movie with the exception of a couple of scenes, like 10% of the movie, and then redid and reshot the entire movie with Rennie Harlan, which became Exorcist: The Beginning, which we'll talk about very shortly. Now, Dominion, I was very curious on, because I wasn't a huge fan of Exorcist: The Beginning, and I was curious what was so different about this that the studio was scared to death to release it. And while I will say as a film, this is probably the better made movie of the two, it's definitely the one that I prefer least because this doesn't feel like a prequel to The Exorcist. It barely even feels like a horror film. It's just the exploration of Father Merrin and his crisis of faith and a very made-for-TV looking aesthetic to it where the final villain is this fucking bald dude floating around in a goddamn diaper. Nothing about this movie appealed to me aside from Stellan Skarsgård's performance being a little bit better here. But as a prequel to The Exorcist, I expect possession, I expect some explanation of what the fuck Pazuzu is, I expect some horror vibes or horror aesthetic to some degree, and it just has nothing. I walk into this movie and I'm like, please, can I have a prequel to The Exorcist?
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Number 24 is The Nun. This movie is an absolute dud. For the character of Valak, which was one of the most big standouts of Conjuring 2, which is a movie you'll see much higher on this list, the fact that this is his standalone movie, the one that kind of gives the origin tales of this great horror character, is a damn shame because this just has nothing. It has nothing to give you. They take the aesthetic and the approach of what James Wan does in the Conjuring movies, which is pretty much what all of these sidequels do in this Conjuring universe, and they try their best to replicate it, but they don't understand why it works when James Wan does it. So this entire movie has a cool vibe to it for the period piece aesthetic to it, and there's a couple of decent scares here, and there's a good central performance by Thaisa Farmiga, although it's very odd to see her not be the younger version of Vera Farmiga, who is playing Lorraine Warren, because they're sisters, they look damn near identical, and it's weird that they would cast her. Nonetheless, that's a tangent. This movie is like a carnival ride. You get into the car, you lock the bar down, and then you just go through these dark hallways and something jumps out at you and scares you, and then you go into the next room and something jumps out at you and scares you, and it's just wash, rinse, repeat of this cycle throughout the entire fucking movie. A character walks into a room, the music and everything starts to swell down to where you can hear a pin drop, you can hear every breath, and you're like, a scare is coming in 3, 2, 1, bleh! There it was. And then 5 minutes later, they do it again, over and over and over again, until they completely rip off the ending of Tales from a Crypt Demon Night. The next two movies might as well be a tie for me. I think they're both equally useless, but I did land with number 23 being the Poltergeist remake. Now, aside from Sam Rockwell being in this, which is an actor that's just completely wasted in this movie, there is nothing in the version of this movie that is preferable to the original. Now, this is not exactly a shot-for-shot remake. It's not a movie that's trying to repeat everything beat by fucking beat like the next movie I'm gonna talk about. But it just feels lifeless. It feels like they don't understand why the original was great, why the original is a classic, and they didn't do anything new or exciting with it aside from change out who the clairvoyant character is. And it's not a good change. It's just a modern take on the character. And there's just so many things in this that feel overly modern to where it takes away that kind of creepy, uncomfortable aesthetic to the family-friendly vibe of the original movie, just that weird mix that it had. This just feels over studio produced, it feels overly modern, and they don't do anything new with the poltergeist side of things, with the new hauntings or new apparitions. It's the fucking tree, it's the fucking clown, and it's the big glowy closet, and we have that movie. What the fuck are you doing? It just doesn't feel like this movie has anything to say. It's a pointless watch. And number 22 is the Omen remake. Now, barely, but I prefer this one only because this does have some different vibes to it than the original film as far as the central performances of Liev Schreiber and Julia Stiles, as well as a couple of elements here, like some new kills and some heightened up kills that I actually like the more modern version, like the one where the fucking priest gets the pole in his chest and then he gets stabbed with a whole bunch of glass to make it even gnarlier. I like that kill. I don't prefer it, but I do like the different version of the decapitation we get of the photographer. So there's some small elements that make me prefer this to Poltergeist. But it's still a movie I'll never watch again because it's basically beat for beat the same as the original movie. It's not exactly shot for shot, but it is definitely script for script. Every line of dialogue, every story beat, every story progression, identical to the original film. And I despise that. As somebody that champions remakes, that loves remakes, and actually prefers quite a few remakes to the original film, it pisses me off when you get the chance to do something new with a classic property and you do the laziest possible fucking thing that you can do and just give this uninspired rehash of what we already have. Number 21 is Exorcist: The Beginning. This is the reshot version of Dominion that was released first, directed by Rennie Harland. Now, this movie does have more of a horror vibe. It does feel more like an actual prequel to The Exorcist because of the third act actually having Pazuzu and actually having an exorcism and all the things that would actually make narrative sense as a prequel lead up to the original film. But beyond all that, it's a very generic horror film that's just trying to go for shock value by showing a kid get torn apart by hyenas and showing, famine and all this torture and all, people getting murdered across this African village. And then getting into the third act, you do have a very good visual and a very good sound design to recreate what Pazuzu looked like in the original film. But the entire third act, as far as what happens action-wise, is pretty ridiculous. There's this whole hallway scene where you got Pazuzu running with these glowing lights that's absolutely fucking ridiculous. There's even a moment where, I always call her Natalia, I can't remember the actress's name, but she grabs a hold of Stellan Skarsgård while she's possessed and just gives the funniest fucking line in this whole franchise.
Because you want to shove your rotten cock up her juicy ass.
It puts the Joe dirt in the hole.
For somebody that does not like prequels, I was actually looking forward to checking this out because I think The Exorcist is a movie that would warrant a prequel. There's a lot of story there that is unexplained that you could actually do a good job with. This movie, nor Dominion, does a good job with that. Number 20 is Annabelle. Now, I don't have a whole lot of defense for this movie. Honestly, there's a lot of movies. There's like 10 or 15 here in the middle that could be interchangeable. They're all just kind of whatever to me, and this is one of them. The reason why I have this a little bit higher than probably some of the other people in this group is going to have is because I was told for so long how horrendous this movie was and how despicable it was that when I finally watched it, Unlike Exorcist II, this was one of those movies where I went, it's not that bad. I mean, it's not good, but it wasn't a fucking train wreck like you made it out to be. So if you like Annabelle movies, if you like creepy doll movies, if you like possession, James Wan style scares, this is a very average, passable attempt at that. It's not offensive to me. I think it actually gets made a little bit better in hindsight when you watch Annabelle Creation, which is another reason why it's probably a couple spots higher than most people that are doing this list, but it's okay. Number 19 is The Curse of La Llorona. Now, same as Annabelle, this is just okay. This is a movie that I don't really have a whole lot of offense to. It's not a movie I can overly praise. It's just something that exists. The weird thing about this movie is that it belongs in the Conjuring universe, but they didn't advertise it as that. You don't find out about it until a character from The Nun pops up in this movie, and you're like, what the fuck is that? That's okay, whatever. But it's a movie it's a haunted house movie. It's a fucking spirit movie. It's the same thing that you get over and over and over again throughout this entire Conjuring universe, to where you have a titular spirit, you have a filmmaker with not a whole lot of experience, and some are certainly better than others, that comes in and tries to replicate the type of movie that James Wan did with The Conjurings, and this is another average, okay, passable attempt at that. Number 18 is Blair Witch, one of the first movies that I reviewed on this channel actually, so it was kind of cool and nostalgic to go back and revisit it. Still not really a movie for me. I'm still not a big fan of found footage. This doesn't change that, but I do prefer the more modern, bigger budgeted version of the Blair Witch story. I mean, you could essentially call this movie a remake, a soft remake, but I prefer that only because the original film is so raw and shaky and everything that it kind of gives me a headache. This one's a little bit more of a digestible experience for me. I like the different effects where the fucking tent gets ripped out of the ground and flies up into the darkness, and I like the more modern takes on the cameras being on their heads and not being fucking shaked around the whole goddamn movie like the original film. And I enjoyed the third act more. I never thought the guy standing in the fucking corner was very scary. I understand why. I understand the story they set up at the beginning of the movie. There was never a version of me, even if I watched it opening night, that would have thought that was a good ending or a scary ending. I'm just one of those people. This, not a great ending, but at least it's more intense. It's a little bit more action-filled for sure, and is a more satisfying conclusion for me. So not a movie that I really ever plan on rewatching, but certainly the favorite of mine of the Blair Witch movies. Number 17 is Insidious Chapter 2. Now this is a movie that dropped quite a few spots for me. It's always been one of my least favorite of the Insidious movies, but it actually dropped to my absolute least favorite of the Insidious movies. Now, I remember liking all of these Insidious movies a lot more. I'll be honest, a lot of them dropped in this list, but when I watched this one, there's just no point of this movie existing. Like, the story of the original film is such a great isolated story with a good cliffhanger, creepy, not happy ending, that the fact that they follow it up and give explanations to who this Black Bride is and give, a light at the end of the tunnel for the story of this family, I think it kind of takes away from how effective the original film is. And my God, if I could describe Insidious Chapter 2 in one fucking phrase, it is this:
Loud noises!
Now, to be fair, all of the Insidious movies are guilty of this to a certain extent, but by far, Insidious Chapter 2 is the worst of every single scare, every single jolt, every single little visual reveal that this movie gives is accompanied by this massive fucking boom in your goddamn speaker system. It's like a creepy ass violin mixed with the giant boom in goddamn Inception or something. So every 5 fucking minutes in this movie, I was just like, oh god damn, why are you doing that? I had a headache by the time I got done with this movie, and I hate that type of jump scare. It felt more effective when these movies were released back before James Wan proved you could do it without all of those loud booms in the Conjuring movies, but they have not aged very well. The jump scare method that James Wan takes in these movies has not aged well. Number 16 is Annabelle Comes Home, and again, this is a movie I don't really have a whole lot to say. It's an okay haunted house Conjuring movie. The Conjuring universe outside of The Conjuring 1 and 2 is some of the most just repeated, generic, rehashed haunted house movies that are in horror movies today, to the point where I think it's killed a lot of the legacy of the original and the second Conjuring movie. And Annabelle Comes Home is certainly one of those, where you get the doll back again. I never thought Annabelle was scary, but apparently somebody did enough to give it a full fucking franchise. There's just as many Annabelle movies as there are Conjuring movies in the Conjuring universe. and it had 3 before the Conjuring movies. You'll never make that make sense to me. But Annabelle Comes Home is a couple of stupid-ass kids locked into a creepy-ass old period piece house in the 70s, or possibly the 80s, I don't fucking remember, and the doll unleashes a bunch of shit in the house. So you get this little, this dude with coins, like the boatman spirit that's probably gonna get his own fucking franchise at some point. You get a werewolf, which was kind of cool, admittedly. I like the werewolf, me likey werewolves. And Annabelle herself is just, it's a doll. I'm sorry. Chucky owns this subgenre. Nobody has taken Chucky's mantle, so Annabelle, sit down, bitch. Number 15 is Poltergeist II. Now, this is a movie, again, first time watch for me. I was very unfamiliar with the entire Poltergeist franchise. We'll talk more about it. Poltergeist II was a first time watch for me. And this is a sequel that carries on directly after the first film. You have all of the family here except for the daughter, which is just randomly not here without a whole lot of explanation. They were just like, you know what, fuck her. We're just gonna go on and let her defend herself from these spirits by herself. But they try to do the same thing again with these apparitions coming through the house, trying to get Carol Ann. But what I like about this sequel is they add in the character of Cain, who is this very unnerving and creepily friendly old man dressed up in a priest outfit. And what I liked about it was that they did a really nice, subtle job of making him kind of the face of the hauntings this movie, to where he keeps coming around the house and, let me come inside and explain to you what's going on. And after about 2/3 of the way through the film, like, I'm just surprised that Craig T. Nelson didn't go answer the door and just be like, look, motherfucker.
Well, we'll show you, old man! There he is! Go get him!
But I liked Cain. I liked his presence in the movie. I liked the backstory that they eventually reveal with him as this crazy cult leader that locked all of his people into this cave and made them all die, and that's something that's very creepy. Aside from him, everything in this movie is just wash, rinse, repeat of the first film, not done anywhere near as good, not anywhere near as charming, and not anywhere near as engaging. So it's just like a rehash. Let's just do the same shit again because it worked before. And it doesn't. This is a movie that I understand why the original Poltergeist is the only movie in this franchise that anybody ever talks about. Number 14 is Insidious: The Last Key, which was my least favorite of the Insidious movies, but it's again a okay, passable haunted house film. There's a whole fucking segment of this list that's just, I could say that and move on to the next one. This is one of them. What I like about this movie is the focus on Elise as the character. I love Lynn Shay in the role. I think she's absolutely the heart and soul of this franchise, which is the big mistake they made in the first film is killing her off, because now they have to be written into a corner and do prequels over and over to get her back. And so I liked that. I liked going into her childhood and, you know, developing her more as a character. Enjoyed all of that. I like the visual aesthetic of the villain here, the demon that has the little key fingers and the way that he unlocks people's voices and stuff. I think it's a very cool visual. And there's some decent, okay scares throughout this movie. If you just want a passable horror movie, this will do the job. But unfortunately, it's exactly that. It's a passable horror film. It doesn't have anything new, interesting, or unique to add to the Insidious franchise. You watch this and you go, yep, they're starting to get tired here. And I am looking forward to seeing what the 5th Insidious movie is going to be, if only because Patrick Wilson is taking over directing duties here, so I'm curious to see what he can bring to it. But as far as Insidious 4, The Last Key probably could have been the last film. Number 13 is The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. Stupid ass title. There's one point against it. This is a movie that I was so underwhelmed and unimpressed by that I didn't even bother reviewing it when it came out. I still get questions, when are you gonna review that? I'm like, it's been like 3 months, motherfucker, never. But The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It is a movie that, as soon as I found out James Wan was not directing it, I became worried. As soon as I found out the guy that directed La Llorona was directing it, I became completely devastated, because The Conjuring 1 and 2 I think are great, and they are absolutely holding this franchise above water with the quality of those films. And to me, it was just like, what the fuck are you doing? If you can't get James Wan, you wait, or you get Lee Winnell. Do not do this. And everything that I thought was going to happen in this movie as far as the drop in quality came to fruition. This movie has a massive James Wan-sized hole in its heart. And everything that it tries to do is like all of the Annabelle movies, The Nun, The La Llorona. It's just a passable, okay, mediocre at best haunted house spirit fair. And that is not what I want out of a Conjuring movie. I can tolerate it with an Annabelle movie, I can tolerate it with a Nun movie, but when you drop the Conjuring down to that level of don't give a fuck, it's offensive to me as a fan. So the movie, I like Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga in the role, even in this movie that they don't have a whole lot to do script-wise. I think that there's a couple of interesting things going on where, you know, she's at the edge of the cliff and she keeps having these visions that's bringing her closer to death, which is kind of a reverse of what we had in Conjuring 2, where Patrick Wilson was the one who felt like he was ill-fated. I like the fact that the main villain of the movie ends up being a human. That's a nice little change of pace for this franchise. Everything else, generic haunted house shit, generic possession shit. I mean, the movie opens up with a kid being possessed in like the worst CGI way, where he's fucking contorting around all the way, and there's wind flowing, and everybody's like, the devil will come out! And then you get the dumb motherfucker who's like, come at me! Number 12, Damien, Omen II. This was another first time watch for me, and it's a movie that I feel like I might have been a little bit too hard on it when I reviewed it, because after watching all of these other movies, and certainly the other sequels in the Omen franchise, this one certainly stands up as being one that I wouldn't mind watching again. Now, I hold true on everything I said in my review. I think that it doesn't bring anything new to the story or the aesthetic of the Omen movies with this creepy kid that everybody's trying to stop. It tries to do the exact same storyline beat for beat, with people finding out about him, trying to get at him, and then just dying immediately. But they take a little bit more of a slasher approach here, a little bit more of a pre-Final Destination approach here, to where every single person dies in like this Rube Goldberg machine. And I like that aspect of the movie. There was a slice and half kill in an elevator that I actually thought was pretty badass. So there's some aspects to this in the slasher side of things that I'll probably revisit this movie for. I think the central performance here as Damien, the kid, did a very good job. I'm surprised he didn't do more. And I think that overall, as far as carrying the torch and reinforcing that whole hidden, looming threat about these disciples, and you don't know who's with Damien, who's against Damien, and that whole plot reveal at the end regarding his aunt, I thought all of that was really good and caught me off guard. Beyond that, just story-wise, script-wise, they just didn't really do anything else here. None of the surrounding characters ever feel like they're going to be any kind of threat to Damien, so there's no tension whatsoever. The whole thing with him, you know, finding out that he is the Antichrist is a complete wasted opportunity here, to where he runs out to the river and shouts, "No, why me?" And that's all you get. Where if they had actually explored him being conflicted about that and something pushing him over the edge, this movie probably would go up a full star for me, and they throw it away. They're like, fuck it, you're here for the kills, let's just get to the kills. Number 11 is Insidious. Now, this movie was much higher on my rough draft list. Before I watch and rewatch all of these movies, I usually form a list of the movies that I already have seen in order, and this one just kept dropping as I watched a couple of other classics, as well as soon as I rewatched this for the first time, I was like, oh yeah, hasn't aged quite well. I think that this is a really good haunted house movie. I think that it is a good attempt of James Wan kind of getting out a lot of his ideas and practice for what eventually became The Conjuring. I like the characters and the central performance here. I think that both the lipstick-faced demon, or Darth Maul as everybody calls him, as well as the bride in black, are very creepy entities that are definitely iconic from this movie, especially the Darth Maul demon. And there's a lot of really good setups for scares here, with things being in the darkness and just, you know, letting you know that something's there, but not showing you what or where, or if we're actually going to see it, and the reactions of characters, or even scares that happen in broad daylight, like the Darth Maul jump scare with Patrick Wilson's mother, and the tiptoe through the tulip scene. If you like haunted house movies, this is certainly one of the better modern ones out there. The problem that I had with this movie upon rewatch is the same problem that I had with Insidious Chapter 2, which is all of those loud booms and loud sounds, to the point where I never felt like I was genuinely on edge, or felt like I was genuinely allowed to like react to something moving in the room, because I was just like, fuck, again? God damn. So while I really do appreciate a lot of the things So while I do have a lot of good memories of watching the motherfucker, number 10 is Annabelle Creation. Now this is the one Conjuring spin-off movie that I actually think matches the level of quality that the first two Conjuring films had. This was a huge course correction after Annabelle, even though I don't think that movie was all that bad. The fact that they went back and made it a prequel about the inception of the doll and what exactly tied this demonic spirit to this vessel of the doll and all of that, I thought it was actually a really good, creepy horror film. I think that there's some good use of some scares here. The whole thing where the demon turns around and like, I want your fucking soul, and all that actually made me jump the first time that I watched it. And by the end of the movie, the way that they wrap the story up and lead directly into the events that kicked off the first Annabelle film, I actually think it makes Annabelle better. So you got David F. Sandberg here as the director. He's the guy that eventually went on to direct Shazam. I think he is the only person that takes inspiration from what James Wan did to kind of set up this universe, but definitely gives the movie his own style, his own pace, and his own method of using jump scares, and I appreciate the hell out of that. So I actually think Annabelle Creation, pretty damn good little horror movie. Number 9 is Insidious Chapter 3. Now, I remember taking my wife to go see this movie and not expecting very much from it because it was going to be a totally separate story from the family of the first 2 movies, and I'm like, well, James Wan's not even directing this. Lee Whannell's directing it. I mean, is he gonna be any good? Nowadays, that's laughable because I think I might even prefer Lee Whannell to James Wan in some aspects, but this was his first feature-length film. This was the first time that he took over the directing duties, and I think he gave us the best Insidious movie because they mostly get rid of that fucking boom thing. There's still a lot of great scares here, like that fucking thing waving to her all the way in the distance in the darkness over and over. That's genuinely unnerving. And there's scenes here like when the demon first shows up and she's, you know, confined to a bed, and he drops down and all you see is his feet as he starts closing the blinds and closing the laptop and taking away all the light in the room. You're like, oh fuck, crawl away, bitch, go! Some shaky acting here and there, especially from her father. There's certainly some things that is just beat for beat another Insidious movie. I mean, you get the origins of Elise, you get the origins of the other 2 paranormal characters that are not the best aspect of these movies. They're kind of a comedic value here that's not needed and not really welcome, but here they are again. And it comes to a conclusion that as far as the final scene that's very predictable and doesn't really have the impact that I think they wanted it to have, but overall, I think this is a really good haunted house style movie. I think that the man that can't breathe, as far as the main demonic presence, is a really creepy presence. I like the whole story direction of the main girl getting into this accident and becoming bedridden to where as hauntings are happening, she's really helpless. She is totally there for the taking for a demon. I thought that added a lot of nice tension to the movie. And like I said, the biggest thing is that this is a movie that has enough confidence in its scares to not have that loud and he's still there. He's still fucking there. Number 8. I'm sorry. The Exorcist. If you guys watched my original review, you saw that this is a movie that I've never really been on the train for. The Exorcist is probably the most popular answer for scariest or best horror film of all time. I've never been somebody that's really agreed with that. Totally subjective thing. If you love it, if this is terrifying for you, if you saw this in the 70s especially, I get it. For me, demon possession, ghost hauntings, it's not necessarily my favorite subgenre, which begs to ask the question of why I decided to do this for the theme this year. But nonetheless, The Exorcist is a movie that even as a kid, it was so overhyped for me. I think I watched it for the first time when I was like 9 or 10 years old, and it's a movie that everybody kept telling me, like, it's the scariest movie, you gotta watch that one. And I'm like, man, Freddy's awesome, Chucky's awesome. Man, have you seen The Exorcist? The Exorcist is gonna change your life. And then I finally watched it, and it just didn't do anything for me. It didn't scare me. It didn't really affect me. It was just kind of like, okay, that's, you know, that was interesting. It's just not really on my wavelength. So, justifying why it's 8 out of 31, which is still pretty damn high and not number 1 like a lot of people would put it, I do like some aspects of this movie. I do think that it is very effective with the physicality of what is happening to Regan, not Regan. I called her Regan, and everybody and their fucking mother's like, it's not Regan, bitch, it's like the president. All of the makeup effects, all of the sound design regarding her voice, the slow progression into the possession is done really well. Even the scene where she's in the hospital and getting, you know, shit stuck in her neck and it's oozing out and everything, that's all very, like, almost pre-torture porn type of visuals that we get in the 70s. So I get why this movie made people pass out and get sick back then. I think that the main storyline with Father Karras is okay. I understand what they're going for. I'm not saying necessarily that he's a bad character or that it's done poorly, but I can't really get on board with his loss of faith because all they really give us as a motivation for that is the death of his mother. And it's like, dude, if you've been a priest for as long as you have, why does the death of somebody affect you like that? That's a natural part of life and you should understand that. But nonetheless, he is a good character arc for somebody that loses his faith and then has to regain it and kill himself basically to save this girl. And Exorcist III actually kind of makes his storyline a little bit better for me for how he continues to have torment in that movie. But overall, The Exorcist is a movie that I certainly respect, and I certainly understand why it has the grandeur and the reputation that it does. It's just a movie that isn't necessarily on those heights for me. I mean, for Christ's sake, my favorite scene in the entire movie is not even in this movie.
Fuck this.
Number 7 is The Conjuring II. This is a very good sequel. It's a little bit overlong, and it's a little bit repeating some of the beats of the first film as far as the scare setups, but as far as bringing us new villains and multiple villains here with Valak, with the Crooked Man, I think they do a really good job at balancing that without making the movie feel overstuffed like something that Annabelle Comes Home very easily suffers from. I like the continuation of the storyline regarding the Warrens. The whole opening in the Amityville house is very cool, although I would have appreciated seeing a whole movie of that. It's a cool opening. I think that the way that they had this mystery regarding the identity, the motive, and the name of this demonic presence, Valak, is really cool and is utilized well. And even the central haunting, which is apparently a true story or a possible true fake story where the girl faked it all, in this town, this little house where this girl is being affected by this old man presence, and she's starting to be possessed, and she's starting to have these creepy voices, and there's all these investigators brought in, and Ed and Lorraine Warren are brought in, and they bring a really nice humanity to this side of story. Like, I love the fact that this movie stops in the middle of all this crazy shit just for Ed and Lorraine to sit down and Ed to play an Elvis song that gives these kids comfort. Wise men say only fools.
Jesus Christ! Wrong franchise, asshole!
And the whole reveal by the end that the old man presence that's been our main haunting the entire time is actually being tormented himself is a nice little twist. I really do like this movie. Just could have been cut back a little bit, could have been a little bit tighter. And I will say the Crooked Man, even though they say that's a practical effect, it never looks practical to me. It does look very digital. Aside from that one effect, I really do enjoy this sequel. Number 6. The Exorcist III. Yes, the sequel that nobody likes to talk about, that nobody acknowledges and nobody seems to appreciate, and I know it's a blanket statement, is my favorite of the Exorcist franchise. I think that this movie is much more on my wavelength. I think that it's scarier. I think that it's more disturbing. I think that the central villainous performance here of Brad Dourif is the best that I've ever seen this guy, and he is so fucking on fire in this movie and so terrifying with the lines that he's delivering and just the way that he describes his kills make it to where you never need to see it. It's just like you were there while he was doing it. The whole central storyline here about an investigator that's trying to solve these murders going around that match the MO of a guy who was executed like a decade ago and eventually falls into this story where Father Karras' body is being used as a vessel for that killer, and Pazuzu, or the devil himself, is helping him keep all of this evil going. It's creepy as fuck. And this movie has genuinely what might be the best jump scare of all time. The first act takes a little while to get going. I think that the third act wraps up with that exorcism thing that feels a little bit forced just because it's an Exorcist movie, but apparently the director's cut is not any better, so it's an okay conclusion for what's going on. But man, the whole storyline and the vibe and the tone of this movie, this one actually disturbs me. This is by far my favorite of this franchise. Number 5, The Conjuring. This is a movie that I honestly did not appreciate on my first watch. I thought that it was overhyped. Everybody was talking about it's the scariest movie, like it's rated R just because it's so scary. And I watched it in theaters and I was like, okay, that was good, but I think I like Insidious better. And after taking this movie home, I swear the movie was way more effective and creepy and genuinely scary when I watched it at home where anybody could walk in, where I was by myself, than the theater, which is usually the reverse. But nonetheless, The Conjuring is a really, really well-made haunted house movie. I love the characters of the Warrens. You know, we could argue all day about whether or not they're legit people or not. I really don't care. As movie characters, they're very effective, as well as the actors that are portraying them. I think that the whole storyline here regarding this family that moves into this house and is being haunted, and there's, you know, every single day at 3:03 a.m. there's knocks and the little girl keeps getting pulled out of her bed, and it's just a nice slow build of paranormal events to eventually get to what is a stock demon possession type climax in the third act. So I think that the whole witch character and the way that Vera Farmiga describes why she is still in this house and what her nefarious plan is for this family and for these little girls is really creepy. The fact that it eventually possesses the mother brings another level of creepiness to it. There's just some really great scares in this movie above anything else. I mean, the hide and clap thing, the witch first being seen on top of that armoire, everything in the basement where you see the witch hang and all you see is her feet, and then she turns towards Vera Farmiga and starts floating towards her. James Wan figured out how to deliver all of those great scares that he had in the Insidious movies without that fucking boom. And here, I think The Conjuring still holds true as the best movie that this universe has given us, and probably will be the best movie the universe ever gives us. Number 4 is Poltergeist. Now, this is a movie that I did not grow up watching very often. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever seen it all the way through. I have seen pieces of this movie dozens of times in random order. And when I watched it in preparation for this video, I was like, holy shit, why have I not watched this movie more? Because it was such a brilliant mix of that old school Steven Spielberg, Amblin Entertainment 80s vibe with some very gritty and disturbing visuals that you could definitely feel coming from Tobe Hooper. This movie was absolutely a collaboration. There's always been a debate of whether or not Tobe Hooper actually directed it or Steven Spielberg directed it. I think you can see both here, and we'll probably never have the true answer, but to me, it's a great mix of those two tones because you get the whole family, you get Carol Ann, it's all very fun, and it's creepy, but it's enjoyable as things start to ramp up. But then you get scenes where like the guy is ripping his face off in the mirror, and you get certain visuals and certain practical effects that are definitely pretty gnarly, leading all the way up to a really good climax with the family finally getting Carol Ann out of this little other realm and the mother having to do it and moving houses, and they're still there, and how they're able to break all of that and the house crumbles in on itself and you fucking move the headstones. It's just a movie that has an incredible pace and it never really lets up, and I understand 100% why this movie is a classic, and it holds up 100% as a classic. As somebody for all intents and purposes might as well have watched this for the very first time in 2021, this holds up as being more enjoyable, more effective, and more creepy than most modern horror films. This is a fucking awesome movie that is definitely going to be a yearly watch for me in October from now on. I was so late to the party on this one that I hate myself. Now we're at the top 3, and I'll be honest, these top 3 are so damn good that I struggled for a while with what was going where, which I usually don't. I usually have a hard number 1, maybe 2 or 3 swap around, but all 3 of these are so damn good that you might ask me tomorrow and my list would change. But number 3 as of right now is going to be Dr. Sleep. This was my favorite horror film the year it came out, and if it wasn't for the fact that Endgame came out that year, it would have been my favorite film that year. It was a humongous, monumental surprise. I really like Mike Flanagan as a director, and pretty much all of his movies I do enjoy, but just about every single one of them never felt like they stuck the landing for me. There's always been something that's just left me going, oh, you almost had it. And so him being attached to this didn't give me the most confidence, and aside from that, he's following up a Kubrick film, so I mean, that's a really tall order. And a sequel to an absolute horror classic that, like The Exorcist, a lot of people would say is the best horror film ever made. And so I had no idea what to expect here. I didn't know what the story of the book Dr. Sleep was. This was an absolute blind walk-in, and I was blown away at how genuinely exciting, creepy, and what a good follow-up this is to not only the book The Shining, but the movie The Shining, which is a very hard thing to do because King pretty much denounces the Kubrick film, and they have very different endings and very different things going on in the story. So how he was able to do a sequel that satisfies both versions of the fandom is just a monumental task. This is a fucking incredible sequel. Everything that you loved about The Shining is brought to a really nice continuation here, an eventual conclusion. I loved Ewan McGregor as Danny, the adult Danny. I thought that he was great all the way through the movie. I thought that they recasted both Dick Hallorann and the Shelley Duvall character, his mother, very well to where you could watch it and not even really miss a beat. And unless you're a cinephile, you might not even really notice that they changed the actors. And I think that as a whole, as a sequel, as a follow-up to The Shining, this does an amazing job at not just being another rehash of The Shining. This is not about going back to the hotel and being haunted throughout 2 hours. This is about The Shining, the actual power, being the forefront of the story here, and Danny kind of having to find out that there is these people walking around sucking the life force out of everybody that has the Shining, and finding this little girl who might even be more powerful than him and being this protector for her. And my God, Rebecca Ferguson as Rose the Hat is incredible in this. Like, this is the movie that instantly made me fall in love with her. I already liked her for Mission Impossible. This was the one where I'm like, nope, I love you now. You are awesome. You are one of my favorites. And this character is just awesome. She's charming and she's cool and she's fun, but she is so fucking evil and sinister. And the way that they bring everything to a conclusion really does feel like it makes The Shining better, which is one of the reasons why I eventually decided that The Shining is going to be higher than this, not just because of legacy, but because this movie is so good that it made an already incredible movie even better. Number 2 is The Omen. And again, I went back and forth because I adore this movie and I adore The Shining about which one was going to be on my number 1, but rewatching them, Dr. Sleep really did knock The Shining into the obvious number 1. If the Dr. Sleep follow-up to that story wasn't quite as strong, I think The Omen would be my number 1. But number 2, The Omen, is one of those few horror classics from the 70s that I still hold in high regard. I'm an 80s guy. I love the 80s music, I love the 80s movies, the 80s slashers, the 80s horror films. There's 70s horror films that I love, but most of them in that era are not nearly on my wavelength the way that the 80s films are. The Omen is one of the few exceptions. I think that this is a genuinely creepy film that does a great job at slowly revealing its story and not rushing through to all of the reveals. It does a good job at making you kind of peel back the onion and discover things along with the characters, and as many times as you rewatch it, you still go along with that journey. I think that the kid, Damien, is genuinely creepy while also being kind of cute and lovable, which makes the whole storyline of having to murder him and him possibly being the Antichrist that much more effective. I think that the Nurse Baylock here is creepy as fuck, maybe the creepiest part of the movie. And all of the kills here regarding the servant that jumps out and hangs herself, the priest that gets impaled, the decapitation, all of that are so effective for 70s kills, and they continue to be effective. And I think that the way that the movie really does hold true in its legacy is that we have gotten so many creepy kid movies. I mean, fuck, this list alone, what have we had, like 20 of these movies that involve a creepy kid? And The Omen is still the patriarch. The Omen is still the Mac Daddy of them all. And if nothing else, I think what we can take from this movie is a lesson for the future, that if there's ever a creepy kid pandemic on the rise, if there's ever an actual apocalypse coming to where the village of the damned or the children of the corn are coming at everybody, us parents must unite and kick ass. But number 1 for me is The Shining. It was a close race, but it did come out number 1 by a nose. This is a movie that I have always enjoyed rewatching because as many times as I've watched it, I feel like every rewatch brings something new. There's either a detail that was hidden there in plain sight, or a visual, or something that stands out more on rewatch. This is just such a thick and rich movie with the lore and all of the just hidden elements here and so many ambiguous elements to the story that I think it merits rewatch more than any other film on this list. I think Jack Nicholson, obviously he's iconic in this role for a reason. It's one of the best performances in a horror film of all time. The direction and the approach and the pacing that Stanley Kubrick gave this movie is perfect. It's a slow burn, but it's meant to be that way as you're slowly kind of descending into madness along with his family. I think Shelley Duvall's a little over the top, and I always felt that way. I understand the whole storyline with Kubrick basically torturing her into giving this performance, and that's fucked up all on its own. But she's the one element of the movie that I just don't quite land for me. But Dick Hallorann and the storyline with him and Danny, with the power of The Shining, I think they do it in a subtle enough way to where it doesn't become too sci-fi, too supernatural. All of the little iconic hauntings with the two Grady twins and everybody at this party, and the whole third act where Shelley Duvall is running around and you see people like with fucking brains spilling out and they're like, great party, isn't it? And you see the fucking bear giving head to the guy. What the hell is that about? I still don't know. Maybe Dr. Sleep 2 will tell us. But this is an absolute classic for a reason, because it's honestly one of the most brilliantly ambiguous films of all time. As many times as you've watched it, as many times as you have theorized on it and given your opinion, we will never have a solid, concrete answer to this movie, and I love that about it. I mean, that last shot of that picture is still one of the most debated and argued elements to a horror film of all time. So for me, this movie absolutely comes in at number 1. So what do you guys think? Give me your 31 on 31 ranking down below, and thank you all so much for making this yet again another awesome lead up to another very fun 31 on 31, and we will absolutely be back again next year and possibly have one even before Halloween. We're talking about some ideas, and we're not gonna have so many of them that we lose the appeal of the Halloween one, but I got an idea for one more in the summertime that we might see, so keep your eyes out for that. And if you want a hint for what the theme of next Halloween's 31 on 31 is, there's an Easter egg in my intro, so go back and watch it. Let me know your theories down below on the theme as well as your own list, and we will talk about it. Please be sure to check out everybody else's list. Brian, CP, and Sean, all of them have done a lot of effort and put a lot of time into these videos, so please bless them with some likes and some views, and subscribe to their channel if you have not already, and see where all of our lists differ. Thank you for watching as always, guys, and please remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.